Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Reedy Creek Perspective. I'm Terrence Jones. Today we are continuing our series called Learning to Forgive. Now, in our last episode, we looked at the greatest challenge to forgiveness, and that was time. The longer that we wait to address pain in our lives, the harder it becomes to forgive. For those of us who have had to deal with pain over a period of years, we would have to admit that we look at our pain a lot different now than how we did when it first happened. As we have grown, we tend to remember what happened to us as the person that we are today and not the person we were when the offense first took place in our life. And so as we have grown, we now to think back on our pain and what happened to us with a lot more details, a lot more nuances. We tend to reflect back on it with all the knowledge that we have right now. And sometimes the more knowledge that we have brought to that event as we have remembered it, the more our pain hurts us as we think about what happened to us. And so when we wait to deal with those very painful moments of our lives, it ends up being much harder for us because we think about our pain, we think about the offense, we think about the offender a whole lot different than we did when these negative things first happened in our lives. Now, in this episode of the Reedy Creek Perspective, I want us to start moving to this place of healing. I want us to now come to this place where we can start implementing the steps that are necessary to move us away from our pain so that we can experience the healing that we need in our lives, the healing that only forgiveness can give to us. So let's begin. Now, as we begin dealing with this process of forgiveness, in this episode, we'll be looking at 3 steps. There are going to be 6 in all that we will examine. But in this episode, we're going to be looking at the first 3 steps on how we implement this process of forgiveness in our lives. But before we get to that, there's a little disclaimer of sorts that I want to bring to your attention. And that is, as you engage in this process of forgiveness, I don't want you to engage in it on your own. There's a verse in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 5 that I want to share with you. Here's how the verse reads. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Now, what that verse is telling us is that the issues going on within our hearts are sometimes very deep, very complex issues, and they're not always easy for us to deal with on our own. But if we can have an individual in our life, what the book of Proverbs call a person of understanding, that person can help us draw the right things out, draw the necessary things out of our lives so that we can deal with the issues that are going on, the purposes, as Proverbs says, that we have within our hearts. And so as you think about this process of forgiveness, as you try to bring about this healing in your life, I don't want you to attempt it by yourself. This is something that you need someone to walk with you, someone that you trust, whether that is a friend or family member, or maybe even someone who is a counselor, that they can walk with you and they can help you deal with these issues, help you understand all that is happening with you as you try to bring out all these hurts and these pains that you have in your life. You cannot bring healing to your heart by yourself. No one can. We believe that God can be there to help us heal, but ultimately we need people of understanding in our lives to help walk with us as we seek to implement and experience forgiveness in our lives. Now let's get to the steps that we need to implement forgiveness. Here's the first one. We need to be able to acknowledge the debt. We must come to the place in our lives where we can admit, where we can acknowledge, where we can accept what happened to us. Now, you might think that this is a given, that this is something probably everyone does, but it's not always an easy thing to admit what happened to you, especially if it was something that was very hurtful, something that was very painful. right? And there are three things that really hinder us from coming to this place of acknowledging the debt, of acknowledging what happened to us. The first one is pride. Now, pride has to do with what we think about ourselves. And sometimes when we get hurt, that can be a blow to our ego. We're not as smart as we thought we were. We're not as strong as we thought we were. That someone was able to come into our life and we were able to misread what their intentions were, and then that person hurt us. That can be a blow to the ego. That can strike us at the very core of who we are. And it is a blow to our self-confidence. And to be able to admit that, to acknowledge that, strikes us at the very core of our being. And it's not always easy to admit that. Not only is there the issue of pride, but then there's also the issue of shame. Now, shame has to do with what we think other people think about us. And in reality, there are some within our community or some within the social circles that we interact with, that there are certain behaviors or certain actions that might be seen as negative, that might have stigmas associated with them. And it could be that what happened to us, the people within our social circles or within our community, might not see this as something that is acceptable. And we might feel that if they were to find out what it is that happened to us, that they would not be accepting of us as they once were. And sometimes that shame can cause us to want to bury the truth of what really happened in our lives because we want to be accepted by them. Not only is there the issue of pride and shame, but then there's also fear of the implications that come with acknowledging what happened to me. Well, does that mean that I have to confront the offender if I acknowledge this? Does that mean that I'm going to have to be defined by this for the rest of my life? Does that mean now that I'm going to have to deal with this by myself? And because we are afraid that we might not be able to handle the implications of this acknowledgement, then we want to deny that it happened to us. Now, just one of these things in our life alone is a very effective silencer. But if we have a combination of all three of these things happening, well, then that is a trifecta for denial. And so we can find ourselves at that place of not even wanting to admit what it is that happened to us because of our pride, because of shame, because of fear. But we have to bear this in mind that in order for us to move forward, we need a starting point. And that starting point is the acknowledgement of the truth of what happened. And when we acknowledge this, I'm not talking about just a vague description. Well, someone hurt me. Well, this person did something horrible to me. I am talking about acknowledging it for what it was, to be able to say it in its most explicit terms. This individual lied to me. This person I trusted betrayed me. This individual I thought was my friend, they stole from me. We must be able to put it in these very clear terms so that we know what we are dealing with. You know, we can't expect for us to have healing in our life if we don't know exactly what it is that's wrong with us. And so we have to come to this place of acknowledging the debt. Now, here's the second step that we need to take. The second step is that we need to learn why it hurt us. We need to learn why it hurt us. Now, if we cannot define our pain, then we are not going to be able to get the healing that we need. We need to be able to explain, we need to be able to describe exactly what it is that we are going through when this hurt happened to us in our life. Now, when we initially have something negative happen to us, sometimes we are overwhelmed by the situation. We are overwhelmed by our emotions. And the tendency is that we want to step back, and we feel as if we need to catch ourselves. And sometimes we feel as if we can't even think because we're just so overwhelmed by the shock of what happened. We weren't expecting this. This person did this to me. I had no idea it was happening. And then sometimes we don't even know how we're feeling. We're just so overwhelmed. We feel as if I can't even think right now. But the reality is that we can think. And what we need to be able to do is, as the situation happens, we need to be able to put what we are feeling into words. We need to be able to describe that. Here is exactly what I am feeling. Because when we can start defining how we're feeling, we can now put a picture to what it is that we're going through. And that image helps remove the confusion. The situation is no longer vague and there's not just chaos. But what we have now is a clearer understanding. Here is how I am feeling because of what happened to me. And that clarity is going to help you be able to move through and navigate these steps to find the healing that you need through forgiveness. Now, here's the third step. Remember your weaknesses. Remember your weaknesses. Now, before you get ahead of me here, I am not about to say, well, we can't really hold people accountable for what they did wrong because everybody has their weaknesses. That's not what I'm going to try to say here. But sometimes one of the narratives that we get locked into when we are hurt by someone and we are trying to figure out, well, how I'm going to deal with this, sometimes we tend to say, you know, I never would have done what that person did to me. I never would have done that to them. How could they have done this to me? If we keep ourselves in that narrative, if we keep telling ourselves that story, we lock ourselves into one particular cycle. And that cycle is, as long as we keep saying, I never would have done what that person did, the offender will always be the monster and we will always be the victim. As long as we keep saying, I never would have done what that person did to me, we keep the person in this image of what it is that they did wrong, and we keep ourselves in this image of the one who was hurt. The reality is, the only reason that you would not have done what that person did to you is because you are not that person. But I guarantee you this, if you grew up the way that they grew up, if you had the influence in your life like they had, if you had their personality and their mindset, you would have done exactly what they did. The truth is that you have hurt people as well. You might not have hurt people in the same way, but you hurt people as well. And the reason why I bring this up is not to shame you or not to make you feel bad or just put you on the same level as someone who hurt you or to somehow belittle what it is that they may have done. But I highlight it so that we can understand this, is that we hurt each other. This is part of human nature. This is part of the human experience. We did not experience hurt because this particular individual was a monster and we were unique and therefore we felt their pain and we were given this situation that no one else experiences. Everyone goes through hurt. People are hurt and people hurt other people. That is part of our human existence. That is the way that humanity deals with itself. But what makes the difference is, in this common environment that we're all in, how we choose to come through on the other side. Are we choosing to come through with healing, or are we choosing to be locked in to this narrative of pain in our life? If we can come to the place of acknowledging our weaknesses, of accepting the fact that this person hurt me as I have hurt other people, this is the reality of my existence, this is where I am, then I have to get through it. How am I going to be on the other side of this? And when we can begin in this process of acknowledging the debt, this process of learning why the pain hurt you the way that it did, or the offense hurt you the way that it did, and then remembering your own weaknesses, this then builds a foundation on how we can start this process now of receiving this healing in our lives. Now, in our next episode, we're going to follow the next 3 steps that we need to complete this process of forgiveness. So I hope that you're going to join us. If you're watching us on YouTube, I want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on Facebook, then I want to encourage you to go ahead to like and follow our page. And if you found the content that we're sharing here helpful, then go right ahead and hit that share icon with your family and friends. From all of us here at the Reedy Creek Perspective, we want to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. God bless.